We get a report on future LA Kings with Jared Shafran on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We are happy to be joined by friend of the show, Jared Shafran. He is manager of communications and content for the Ontario Reign and contributor to LA Kings Insider. You can follow him on X or Twitter at Shafrain. And he's going to join us to tell us about development camp that literally just wrapped up a little while ago. Jared, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
Doing great, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And we are certainly going to talk a little bit about the Ontario Reign, some players from the Reign who should play bigger roles with the Kings this year. But literally just wrapping up, as I mentioned, is the Kings development camp for this year at the Toyota Sports Performance Center there in El Segundo. 3 days of some of the hopefully young stars in the making for the LA Kings on display. But real quick, before we get into what you saw and the report on some of the players, how they did, for people who may not know, we don't want to assume they understand, but what is development camp all about? Who gets invited and what's its purpose?
Yeah, so it's basically a summer showcase for players that are in the system for the LA Kings. It actually encompasses kind of a wide range of levels of play. You have guys who mostly were drafted in the last 3 years by the LA Kings, and a lot of them are at different development paths. So this allows the Kings to bring in basically anyone who they've drafted over the past couple of years and give them an opportunity to showcase what they've been working on. Most of these players are players who are playing in juniors, whether it be juniors overseas in another country or in Canada or in the United States, or college players, or some of them are minor pros who are playing with either the Ontario Reign, the Greenville Swamp Rabbits, one of the team's affiliates, and just a general showcase for them and a great opportunity for the Kings development coaches. They have a whole development staff where they have 2 coaches that focus on the forwards, 2 on the defense, goaltending coaches as well. All those guys get a chance to get on the ice, do drills, do sessions, kind of see where these players are at, work with them, develop their skills, give them some reminders about what they need to be working on, kind of check in with them. And it also, for the guys who just got drafted in the NHL draft last weekend, there's an opportunity for them to see El Segundo, get an opportunity to be here in LA for a couple of days, meet all the people in the organization, start to get familiar with some of these people, because obviously the NHL draft, it happens when most players that get drafted are 18. And when you're 18 years old, 99% of these players who get drafted, they're not ready to jump to the NHL right away, but each player has a different path, a different development path. So this is an opportunity for all of those guys that are younger prospects to come here and get to work with the Kings.
Well, let's focus on some of the players. And of course, we want to talk about the new players, the guys that were just drafted in Las Vegas over the weekend. But I do want to start, though, with a position that's maybe a little bit easier to focus on when you're there watching a lot of these players go through drills, go through scrimmages, and that's the goaltenders. Hampton Swiginski is a guy that I've been really intrigued by. He was there, and also Carter George, who was just drafted by the Kings in the second round. 2 goaltenders that I think a lot of people are interested in. What can you tell us about how they looked over the past 3 days?
Yeah, well, if you had to ask me, what was the difference or what was the big thing that I noticed at camp, I think the goaltending it's great to start there, because both of those 2 players, I think, are 2 of the most exciting prospects in the Kings system right now. And, it's interesting because the last couple of years, we haven't been able to say that about a goaltender. Eric Portillo is obviously a guy in Ontario right now. Portillo a guy who aged out of this camp, a little bit too old for this development camp. He's still developing in Ontario, but had a couple years in college, so he's a little bit older than a lot of the guys who are at this camp. So the Kings did not bring him over. He had a long season with the Reign and is expected to be with the Reign again next year. But other than Eric Portillo, there wasn't really anybody else other than Hampton Slukinski, who was drafted last year. And then, as you mentioned, Carter George, I think those two guys really showcased themselves this week. It was awesome to be able to watch them. They're different type of goaltender a little bit, but I thought you can just see the athleticism and the skill level that they have at stopping the puck. Yesterday in the scrimmage, the first scrimmage that they had on Tuesday afternoon, the two of those guys started the scrimmage and neither one allowed a goal in the first 35-minute period. So really great opportunity for them. They did not play in the scrimmage today. Neither of them dressed. That was a planned thing for them. Is they actually brought 7 goaltenders to camp, which is the most I've ever seen in one of these camps for the Kings. So a lot more invite players, undrafted players that were in camp this week. So we didn't get to see Slukinski and George in the scrimmage today, but they were outstanding in the scrimmage yesterday. And I think, Carter George made this amazing save where he reached back behind his body to grab the puck. And it was definitely a highlight of the week for me, just watching them. I think both of them are outstanding. The one thing I just want to tell everybody, they are not even close to ready to join the Kings. For Hampton Slukinski, played in the USHL this year. He did everything you can do in the USHL, everything that you'd want him to do. He was the best goalie in the league. He won goaltender of the year. His team, the Fargo Force, won the Clark Cup, the USHL championship. Just an outstanding year for him. So he's ready to go into college, but now he's going to go to college and it's going to take him a little while. I think he just recently recommitted to Western Michigan. So he's going to be in college for a while. Or did he? Yeah, I don't remember which college he just decommitted from Northern Michigan. I think
right.
Western Michigan is, I think.
Right. I believe that's correct. Yes.
But so for him, he's not even close to turning pro yet. I think at the minimum, he's going to need 2 years in college, maybe could be 3, even 4 before he eventually turns pro, then probably has some time with the Ontario Reign before he would join the Kings. So I think very exciting. And he's hitting every benchmark you'd like to see him hit, but also goaltenders, I think they take about on average 5 years to really hit their potential after they're drafted. You look at those guys, they start to get to the NHL around 22, 23. So for him, there's no rush. And then for Carter George, he just got drafted last week. So same type of thing. I think he's going to take a little while to develop, but a second round pick. So the Kings spending a pretty prime draft pick on Carter George. And again, so far it seems like he's really exciting to watch. So I think we're going to have to keep an eye on him when he goes back to junior this year and maybe turns pro in the next couple of years to start getting closer to be with the Kings.
All right, and let's hit on the other 3 players the Kings drafted this year in the first round. Forward Liam Greentree, then you had the defenseman Jared Woolley, and with the 6th round, and then in the 7th round, forward James Reeder. Any of those 3 guys jump out at you? Any of those 3 guys you want to talk about?
Sure. Well, first of all, James Reeder in the 7th round, the draft pick there, actually did not make it to camp. So I wasn't able to watch him play. Another guy who was in the USHL this past year with the Dubuque Fighting Saints, actually the team that Hampton Slukinski defeated in the finals with the Fargo Force. Dubuque was the runner-up, and an outstanding season for Reeder. He's going to go to Denver University, actually going to be a teammate of another Kings pick, Jared Wright, this year. So I think with all of everything going on with Reeder and his commitments to Denver University, he was not able to. And also, honestly, talk about a quick turnaround. The draft was on the weekend, Friday, Saturday. And then there was one day to get here, and then camp started on Monday. And Reeder was not at the draft in Las Vegas. Obviously, a 7th-round pick, kind of a toss-up of whether he was going to get drafted or not. He didn't go all the way out to Las Vegas. So for him, it would have been a really, really quick turnaround to get here. And I think, like I said, he had some commitments with Denver. So didn't get to see him, but did get to see Liam Greentree a lot. I thought he was excellent. Definitely one of the best forwards that I could see on the ice. He's got size. His shot is excellent, which is really what you want to see out of a high-level first-round pick like that. The size is there. He drives to the net. He's good with the puck. He was able to create turnovers and start plays the other way. I thought a lot of really solid attributes from him and definitely stood out in all the sessions that I watched him. He is one of those guys who probably, the one knock on him is a little bit on the skating side. So, that's just one of those things where he is not the fastest guy out there by any means, but I didn't think he struggled to keep up at all. It's just, he's so big and so strong that he looks a little bit different than some of the other guys that are a little bit smaller out there, but a great showing from him, and a guy who definitely will keep an eye on, and, should be in LA sooner than probably a lot of these other guys. And then when you talk about Jared Woolley, a guy who this year, when you look at his season, he didn't even start in the OHL. He started in Junior B and was called up to the OHL in the middle of the year, and then had an outstanding run in their run to the Memorial Cup. They didn't win the Memorial Cup, but they had a great run to even make it into that end of the tournament there. And he played with another Kings prospect, Caleb Lawrence, who had a good week here. Lawrence is getting ready to begin his pro career. He's going to have the opportunity to try to make the Ontario Reign this year. So Lawrence was on that team. I think the Kings were watching Lawrence a lot because he's already one of their prospects, and they saw Jared Woolley, and you know what? They moved up to get him. They made that trade with Anaheim, and for him, another really big, strong defender, and actually moves the puck pretty well. Skates pretty good for his size, but definitely a guy who's a longer-term prospect type player that, I think he needs a couple more years in the OHL for sure, and then would see him turn pro and, again, take some time to develop before he jumps into the NHL. But definitely one of those bigger guys who you can see the strength out there. You can see he has all those raw tools. It's just kind of bringing them all together and getting his play ready for professional hockey. It's going to take a little while.
All right. Definitely going to talk a little bit more about development camp, and also going to get into some of the players you saw in Ontario this year who should get a bigger opportunity with the LA Kings coming up this season. That's next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I recently purchased tickets to see my alma mater, Fresno State, play a little college football this year at the Rose Bowl against UCLA, and I am a very satisfied customer. The app is easy to use, easy to navigate. You just tap on the listings, sports, music, shows, and they can give you a list of tickets with the best deals. Easy to search for teams or events. My favorite feature is the panoramic view they show you from the seat that you want to buy. You know the exact view you're going to get before you buy your seat, and they give you the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're continuing with Jared Shafran, who covers the Ontario Reign and is also a contributor to LA Kings Insider and was at the Kings Development Camp, which just wrapped up a little bit earlier today. So we talked about the new guys, obviously the new shiny toys. We always have to talk about those kind of guys. But of the other players that were there, maybe this was not their first development camp, maybe even some guys you've seen with Ontario. Anyone else that kind of jumped off the page for you this year at development camp?
The highlight player for me today in the scrimmage, no doubt in my mind, was Ryan Conmey. He's the guy who turned everybody's heads the most. He had a great freshman season at the University of New Hampshire last year, and I think he led his team in scoring. I think he had 33 points last year in 31 games. A guy who the Kings drafted last year, did come to development camp last year, but this year he looked good in development camp last year. He looked like a draft pick. He looked like one of the better players. In this scrimmage we just had, he was the best skater out there, and I don't even know if it was that close. He was excellent. So really awesome to see a guy who is a little bit on the smaller side, but just his talent level and his skating was what was showing. Every time that he was on the ice, he was with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, creating opportunities. He did score a goal for his team in this afternoon scrimmage. So definitely keep a lookout for Ryan Conmey. Again, just finished his freshman year. He is going to go back to school for a sophomore season, and I think he's going to be a guy that you're going to want to watch, keep developing, and hopefully have a try to shot to turn pro here in the next couple of years. And then Francesco Pinelli played for the Reign last year, so he's the one player that played pro last year in this entire camp. Usually there's some more players, just the way things worked out for the Kings with how their draft picks are. A lot of the guys kind of graduated out of this camp. A Martin Chromiak, Andre Lee, Samuel Hellenius, those type of players were all, at these type camps the last couple of years, but they've graduated out of that. And Francesco Pinelli was the only pro player that was in this camp, and he stood out I thought he really looks more poised, more calm. He's been into a few of these. He was kind of one of the leaders out there, kind of a guy who players are looking towards as someone who can show them the way and modeling drills, kind of going through things with the development staff. So really great to see Francesco Pinelli jump into that type of a role. I think he's going to have a better opportunity in Ontario this year with some more minutes. He definitely played better down the stretch with the Reign at the end of last season. And I think Marco Sturm's going to be counting on him for some bigger minutes this year. So good to see him. I thought he was really good too. And, those are some of the forwards that stuck out for me. The other guy is Jacob Dvorak. It was great to see him, as last year he was the highest selected Kings player, a second round pick last year's NHL draft. So after his first +1 season, as they say, the first year after you get drafted, he had a bit of an interesting year as he started in the Czech Republic in the Czech Professional League, and then actually decided to come over to North America, play in the Western Hockey League in Canadian Major Juniors. So 2 different experiences for him. The Czech League, you're playing against older players, you're playing against men, and he was obviously an 18, 19-year-old kid, so a younger guy, and it's a good experience for him. And then he went over to the Western Hockey League, where he's playing with players that are more his age at that 18, 19-year-old range, but a little bit more of a physical style of game. When you come to North America, there's a lot more checking. In Europe, it's a little more free-flowing, a little bit more open. So a different style of game, and I think that was good for him because the game there in the Western League, in the WHL, probably a little bit closer to what he's going to see for North American Pro. So I think, it's interesting. We just heard from Glenn Murray at the end of camp, and he basically said, we don't know where Jacob Dvorak's going to play this coming season because maybe he's ready to join the Ontario Reign, and he is eligible to join the Reign right away and play AHL games if they feel that that's the best fit. But he also could go back to junior. He also could go back to the Czech Republic. So the Kings and Jacob Dvorak need to figure out what's the best route for him to play this year. And maybe like it did last year, maybe it changes throughout the season. We're not really sure. But a guy to keep your eye on because, again, a second-round pick, somebody that the Kings have their eye on pretty closely and someone that they expect to be in LA before long.
So let's talk now about, as we transition kind of out of the guys who are a few years away from being LA Kings potentially, to guys who have been in Ontario where you are with the Reign, being also the analyst on game days. You're there. You've seen these guys up close and personal. The Kings have gotten and their fans have gotten a taste of these guys last year or here and there. But Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas, Samuel Fagemo, they either are on the cusp or are looked at as guys that are going to get a bigger role next year with the LA Kings. So the question on, if you could touch on all 3 of these guys quickly, where do you think they fit best if they are on the Kings as far as center, wing, those kind of things, and maybe 1 thing or 2 things that they need to take it to the next level to be full-time NHL players?
Sure. I think at this point, for all 3 of them, the Kings are hoping that they are ready to be full-time NHL players, because if any of them are not ready and the Kings elect to try to send them to the Reign, they're going to have to go through waivers. And so, I just look at it when you start with Alex Turcotte, I don't think you want to send your number 5 overall pick through waivers. That's not a good look. I think Alex is ready to be a full-time NHL player. He showed that last year. Now, where he actually plays in the lineup, I think it's great that because of the way that the Kings have developed him, he has played primarily at center when he's been with the Reign, but the Reign had him at wing last year too. And he also has played center and wing at the NHL level. So I think it's hard to really know exactly where the Kings see him at this point, whether he's going to be a center or a wing. Jim Hiller only had a limited amount of time with Alex Turcotte last year. When Todd McClellan was the head coach of the Kings, and Turcotte was younger at that point with less experience, he played primarily on the wing at the NHL level. But we did see him at center once he came back up under Jim Hiller, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him at center again. I think, I've heard some differing opinions on this. Some people say they'd rather have Turcotte play center, maybe on the 4th line, as he's kind of a pure center. That's what he grew up playing. That's what he's maybe a little more comfortable with. But then to transition to one of the other guys, Akil Thomas, potentially, if everyone stays healthy during training camp, it might be Akil Thomas or Alex Turcotte. You might not have room for both of those guys to play center. So if one of them is going to be on the wing and one of them is going to be a center, I think, there's arguments for both of them. Akil, the thing that you love about Akil Thomas is his strength. And I think he's really good in the faceoff circle. He's really good defensively. So is Turcotte. So it's a little bit different. I think Akil's a little bit bigger than Alex Turcotte is. So if you're looking for that size up the middle, then maybe you're going with Akil at center. If you're looking for the tenaciousness that Turcotte has, his wall play, the way he gets in deep and pulls the puck away from battles, I think that's a strength of Turcotte's. And not that Akil can't do that either, but I think, again, Akil Thomas, a guy who hasn't played a ton due to injury over the past couple seasons. This was his first full healthy season in a couple of years. And obviously Turcotte's had his injury issues as well, which has slowed both of their development. I think that Akil Thomas, if he had to go on waivers, probably less of a chance that he gets claimed, but still, he seems like a pretty valuable prospect. I don't know that you want him to go on waivers either. I think, he showed last year when he came up in that 7-game span that he can play in the NHL and he can make a difference. So a guy who's willing to accept any role that he's given, he plays penalty kill time. He has an opportunity to also to make an impact and be one of those bottom 6 forwards when the Kings break camp, and I'd expect him to challenge for that spot. And the third guy is Samuel Fagemo. And, Samuel Fagemo last year was sent on waivers, was claimed by the Nashville Predators. The Kings probably lucky to have him back in their system. By the time he made it down to the AHL after he was with Nashville for a little while, you know what? I think he just stopped thinking and started playing. It was just, hey, he was fortunate. I think he said it. He felt fortunate to be back with the Reign and back in an organization that he's comfortable with. And honestly, he loves LA. He loves being here. He was so happy to get back into a situation that he was comfortable with. And he scored 40 goals for the Reign. I think 43. That's the most goals that anyone's ever scored in a single season for the Reign. And, that's not an easy thing to do. So I think for Sammy, it's finding a way to be effective once you get to that NHL level, because he knows how to do it at the AHL, but hey, it's not the best league in the world. The NHL is. And so it's going to be harder. And I think for Sammy, it's, finding a way to stand out. He's not going to score 43 goals for the Kings next year, but can he find a way to make an impact and score some and, maybe, emphasize more of the defensive play or, find his way onto the power play? Because if he makes the Kings, it's going to be tough for him to produce the way that he did if he's getting those fourth line minutes. And in the past, when he has been on the Kings and he has played in the NHL, he hasn't gotten those top 6 minutes. So he's got to find a way to stand out and make an impact in the bottom 6. And, I think another year of off-ice training, of being healthy and, of obviously getting a chance to play at a high level has him poised to try to make that jump. For me, he's the one that, maybe his skills have a little bit more to go before it translates. But again, I think the Kings, with all 3 of them, they don't want to put those guys on waivers. Like, any of those guys get claimed, and that's a big loss of an asset. So for LA, I think they're trying their best to get these guys ready and develop them and have them be full-time NHL players. And they don't all have to play every single night. I mean, there might not be a spot for them in the lineup every single night, but it looks like, at least right now on July 3rd, it looks like there's going to be cap space for the Kings to carry 13 or 14 forwards if they elect to, which means that's okay. Like, not maybe one night Akil's not in the lineup. Maybe one night Sammy's not in the lineup, or same thing for Turcotte. So it kind of gives them a little internal pressure, a little bit internal competition to compete for those spots in the lineup. And the Kings don't have to send them on waivers. Like last year, they only had like 21 players on the roster because they couldn't fit anymore with the cap. So they're not as cap strapped as they were last year, at least at this point. They could still sign somebody else and that would change it. But if it stays this way, they'll be able to carry all of them and rotate them in.
All right, a little bit more on maybe some potential Ontario Reign players that could be with the Kings next year. And we're going to talk about the Ontario Reign for next season as well. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Drive passionate patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because of eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. All right. A little bit more with Jared Shafran of the Ontario Reign. I do want to get your input on some of the things involving the Reign, but there was one more player I did want to ask you about, and that was Andre Lee. Some people have kind of talked about him as maybe being a dark horse to kind of join the LA Kings if possible. I know last year nobody saw Alex Laferriere doing what he was going to do and be a full-time NHL player. Is there anyone that we haven't talked about that was with the Ontario Reign last season that you think might be, under the right circumstances, get a chance at the NHL next year?
But I think Brant Clark has an opportunity to be a full-time LA King player. We haven't talked about him, but I think it's pretty obvious that he's almost ready. And I think it's pretty obvious that, especially with Matt Roy departing in free agency, the spot is now there. It's cleared for Brant Clark. If he's not on the roster, that's probably a pretty big issue. He did everything that he needed to do at the AHL level last year. I'd expect the Kings to work him into the lineup on a pretty much nightly basis moving forward. Other than that, I think when you look at the additions that the Kings have made, whether it's via trade or free agency over the past couple of days, I don't know that I see a spot for anyone else right away. Again, we didn't see a spot for Laferriere. It's because Victor Arvidsson was injured that Laferriere got his opportunity. Laferriere was not even included on the roster to go to Australia last year in the preseason. So he was that far down on the radar. I do think that last year around this time I was saying, look out for Alex Laferriere. He's a guy who could get a call-up, who could get some games. I definitely did not say he would be a full-time NHL player, but I think, he's definitely a guy who jumped out a little higher because of the injuries. So if there were some injuries again in training camp, which obviously you don't want to see, could Andre Lee be a guy that gets an opportunity? Maybe, but I don't think he is where Alex Laferriere was last year. I think Andre Lee did a lot last year when he was in the lineup. That was great. Marco Sturm trusted him in a lot of different situations, but do I think that he's ready to jump in on opening night to an NHL lineup? No, I do not think that. I get the hype about him because he's big, he's strong, he's physical. He's really starting to play the role that the Kings were hoping for when they drafted him in the draft. But he probably needs another full year because you look at him and it's a little bit similar to what we talked about with Turcotte and Akil Thomas. Last year, Andre Lee had two pretty significant injuries. He did not play a full season. I think he absolutely needs to play a full AHL season this year before we start considering him ready for the NHL. I think that, again, definitely don't want to rule him out for a potential call-up and a potential opportunity to play a game or two, but I think he's a little further away. I do not think that he's going to make the team right out of camp.
All right, we've talked about Akil Thomas, Alex Turcotte, Samuel Fagemo, and I know that Captain TJ Tynan has moved on. So there's a lot of holes to fill for the Ontario Reign for this coming season. Who are some of the players that are now eligible to play for the Reign that you're looking forward to seeing for next season?
Yeah, so I always am careful about this because a lot of these guys right now are LA Kings signings. So they do, have a two-way contract, which allows them to be sent to the AHL. But, to me, all of these players, when you talk about a guy like Andre Lee, he is not ahead of any of these players I'm about to talk about because these guys who the Kings just signed on the first day of free agency on Monday, they've already played in the NHL. So to me, when you look at, okay, if a couple guys go down with an injury and you need a quick fill-in, you're looking at a Glenn Gaudin. Glenn Gaudin, the last 3 seasons, has been in the AHL Pacific Division. We have seen him against the Reign. The Kings scouts and the Reign scouts have seen a lot of Glenn Gaudin. He played for the San Diego Gulls for the last 2 years and a little bit with the Anaheim Ducks. So they clearly saw something they liked here in this division that they wanted to bring him onto our side. Glenn Gaudin, a guy who is a versatile depth center. He can play in all areas of the ice. And, I would expect to be a top 6 center for the Reign if he makes it down. If he doesn't make the NHL roster, I think he's definitely has an outside chance of making the Kings. If he doesn't make the Kings, he would be one of the best players on the Reign if he were to come down. And again, a guy who's, I would think, is much closer to getting an opportunity to play at the NHL level than Lee because he's got more experience, a little bit older. When you need somebody to fill in it when someone goes down on an injury, and it's not a long-term situation, you might look at a guy like Glenn Gaudin or Jeff Malott. Jeff Malott played the last 3 years with the Manitoba Moose, the Winnipeg Jets AHL team, and in all 3 of those years, he stayed healthy. He had productive seasons. He scored over 20 goals 3 straight years. And again, comparing it to Andre Lee, Andre Lee has never scored 20 goals in an AHL season. This guy's done it 3 straight years. So another guy who, if the Kings really like him during training camp, Jeff Malott might be on the team opening night. He's had some great experience, and he's only 27, so he's not, he's kind of right in the prime of his career. He's not on the older side of things, but he's not a young gun either. And then the third guy up front was Tyler Madden that the Kings signed as well. Has yet to make his NHL debut, but a guy who was in a pretty big trade way back when for the Kings. And, a lot of Kings fans know him as a prospect who's really been, developing with the Reign over the past 4 years, and another good depth piece for them. So he's back, could potentially be with the Reign if assigned. And then the fifth guy that the Kings just picked up was Riley Walsh. Walsh is a guy who was a pretty high-end prospect back a long time ago when I was working in the USHL. He was drafted by the team that I was working for at that time, the Tri-City Storm. So a little familiar with him from way too long ago in another lifetime. But he's a guy who's made his way through the ranks. He played at Harvard University. He was a really outstanding player at Harvard, got an opportunity to turn pro. He was with the Boston Bruins organization last year playing in Providence. He also was with the Devils organization, the team that drafted him, played for the Utica Comets for a couple of years, had some excellent numbers. So on the blue line, he's a guy who might replace, if he were down in Ontario, he might replace, some minutes that we had Kevin Connaughton, Steven Santini, some veteran defensemen that did not return. Connaughton signed with Utah, a 2-year deal with the Utah Hockey Club, and Steven Santini got a deal with the Tampa Bay Lightning. So those couple guys that were with the Reign last year have moved on to other NHL organizations. And yeah, those guys are all eligible to come down to the Reign this year if they don't make the Kings. And if they were to come down, they'd be some of those big veteran Reign players that people can count on.
All right. That is Jared Shafran, Manager of Communications and Content for the Ontario Reign, contributor to LA Kings Insider. Jared, appreciate your insight. Great to get your thoughts on the Kings development camp, some of the players from the Reign who could be with the Kings this season as well. Always appreciate your time. You guys follow him on X and Twitter at Shafrain. And Jared, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, sounds great, Eddie. Thanks for having me, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good. And that's our time for today on this show. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked on LA Kings every day. Coming up tomorrow, we will have a special holiday-themed 4th of July show. And then, of course, on Friday, it is our usual Kings fan feedback show. So much to talk about this week. The NHL draft, free agency, development camp, all that. If you want to get your thoughts in, you want to get an email in, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. Stay interactive on social media with the show, on X, on Twitter, on Instagram. We're at Locked on LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked on LA Kings, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings go.